You are listening to an SAFM podcast, 104 to 107 nationwide. Stream us live on www.safm.co.za or via the SABC Plus app. SABC News, independent and impartial.
The economic freedom fighters will today lead its VAT victory march to the National Treasury in Pretoria, hailing what it calls a people's win against the proposed VAT hike. The EFF is celebrating what it describes as a major victory for the people, following the withdrawal of the proposed VAT hike in the national budget. EFF spokesperson Sinau Tambo now joins us to discuss the significance of this march and the ongoing pressure on the Finance Minister, Ido Gonagwana, ahead of the tabling of the budget this week. A very good morning to you, sir, and welcome.
Morning, and morning to your listeners, Alves.
Firstly, what is the VAT Victory March all about, and what does it entail?
Look, first and foremost, we think that, as you have correctly asserted or reflected, that it is a people's victory against a government that lacks the imagination to grow our economy outside of taxation of ordinary poor people. So over the past 2 months, the EFF has been engaged in resistance to the VAT increases in Parliament and, of course, in the courts of law, which made a lawful setting aside of the fiscal framework which was adopted illegally in the Standing Committee of Finance and in the National Assembly, and ultimately a lawful intervention to set aside the increases of the value-added taxes, which would have meant that goods and services would have been more expensive for ordinary people in order for governments to generate revenue. So we want to emphasize that this was a people's victory that is not owned by the EFF, but owned by the people of South Africa. But it doesn't end there, because the continued lack of imagination by National Treasury, lack of transformation by National Treasury, is something that needs to be opposed, because outside of the VAT increases, the alternatives by this government continue to be a burden on ordinary people, because what is going to follow now are austerity measures, which entail cutting of spending to healthcare, education, and frontline services. And additional to that is the continued borrowing, which will continue to burden ordinary people and future generations to debt. So we want to emphasize that we are going to continue to oppose the measures that are being proposed by National Treasury and make alternative proposals which include the taxation of the wealthy, introduction of once-off taxes on apartheid trusts, but also an increase in corporate income tax, which has decreased in 2022 in order for us to generate the necessary revenue to care for the people of South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Now, the EFF's proposal to scrap the VAT hike has created a significant revenue shortfall. So, ahead of the tabling of the Budget 3.0, what level of engagement has the EFF had with the Finance Minister, and what are the party's key expectations from the budget?
Surprisingly, one would have thought that the Minister of Finance would have embarked on a broader-based engagement to ensure that he crafts a budget that will be adopted by all political parties in Parliament. But he has not done this. Rather than doing this, he has centered his engagement with the Democratic Alliance, which is a member of the Government of National Unity, considering the fact that all he would need or require for his budget to pass successfully is the support of the DA. And one would wonder as to whether the DA is going to be in support of the budget cuts that entail cutting of funding to frontline services, such as healthcare, education, and possibly a lack of increase of social grants, if not the scrapping of the social relief dispersed grant, which was introduced in the COVID period entirely. So there's been no engagement with the Minister of Finance, and I think it's a reflection of a lack of understanding and appreciation of the changing dynamics of coalition government. But we would say that the Minister of Finance should, and that's what is going to happen post his introduction of the budget on Wednesday, when he comes to the Standing Committee on Finance and when there's public hearings on the fiscal framework that will be presented, that there must be honest and sincere engagement with proposals that are going to be made by all of those stakeholders, because he seems to be more interested in securing a vote of support for his budget rather than listening to South Africans as to what they think is necessary in order to stimulate the South African economy.
I thank you for your time and leaving us with that. That was the EFF spokesperson, Sinau Tambo.
You can find SAFM Current Affairs on 104 to 107 nationwide. Our podcasts are available for download on all our digital platforms. SAFM, leading the conversation.